It had long been evening outside, but the light from one of the windows of the student dormitory illuminated the dark street. Frantically clutching his cell phone in his hands, Michael could not believe that he had just received a message from his girlfriend with information about the end of their relationship. He made his last attempts to establish communication, typing message after message and talking about how good they would be together. But this did not change the girl's decision, and in the end, Michael saw that she had blocked his contact. Noticing Michael's strange behavior, his roommates asked if he was okay, to which the young man replied something not entirely intelligible. But a moment later, Michael suddenly hit the table with his fist as hard as he could. And without saying a word, he stood up and quickly left the room, dropping his chair and half-eaten Chinese noodles, and his neighbors already realized that their friend had been abandoned once again. Where this time it was one of the beauties of the Institute, Veronica, who broke off relations with Michael. Meanwhile, Michael had already managed to reach the place where they intended to meet and discuss everything before the girl sent him a message about the breakup, where he was still lucky to meet the dazzling Veronica. Remembering the joyful beginning of their relationship, the young man, holding out a bag of goodies, began to persuade the girl not to end it, claiming that he was ready to change, if something doesn't suit her about him. But the merciless girl did not leave him a chance, saying that they did not hold any grudge against Michael, but simply realized that her ex-boyfriend needed more and wanted to get along with him. Such a statement greatly hurt the young man, who would have been ready to accept his imperfection, but could not believe that he had given in to another, and not the best option, who had already managed to deceive Veronica several times in the past. At this time, a luxury, expensive car pulled up to the side of the road. The side window on the passenger side rolled down, and the man sitting behind the wheel smugly invited the girl to sit in the cabin. Veronica did not keep her waiting, and finally told Michael that it was better for them not to meet again and not communicate at all. After these words, the girl got into the car and the car quickly sped off, taking with it the last hopes of the young man and leaving him completely alone on the streets of the night city. After thinking for a few minutes, Michael threw away the goodies he had bought for Veronica and walked away. He walked around the city at night for a long time and finally decided to go to the supermarket. Washing down his grief with mineral water, the young man thought about why girls generally don't appreciate the sincerity of guys. He didn't know where to take out his anger and squeezed the empty bottle with all his might. Rage and anger literally overwhelmed his entire being, and Michael decided that he would no longer behave politely and follow the girl's lead, but would make them run after him. And then something happened. Some voice from outside first said that the connection to the master system was completed. Then a transparent screen appeared before the young man's eyes, on which his name was written. Information about the absence of enhancements was contained, and the account balance was listed as $90 billion. Shocked by what was happening, the young man tried to touch this screen, and at the same moment heard an indignant female voice, calling him a pervert and pointing out the need to watch his hands. Michael, who had not yet come to his senses, tried to figure out what was happening around him. And finally, he saw the dissatisfied face of the girl, who was now saying that the young man was not all right in his head, and the voiceover announced the name and age of this girl, and also announced that her relationship to Michael was minus 50 points. Until now, Michael, unaware of anything, simply stood there, his mouth open in surprise, and the voice continued, saying that he needs to spend money on girls, and as soon as the girl's attitude rating towards Michael reaches plus 96 points, she will become his fan. From what he heard, the young man experienced an even greater shock, and could not believe that just like that he was given 90 billion and told to spend it. And meanwhile, the voice asked the question whether to launch the game, warning that this money can only be spent on girls. But after the unknown person said that the master would get back a tenth of what he spent on the girls, and that additional skills would appear, the young man's answer was already predictable, where he immediately set his first goal. Putting on his most good-natured face, Michael told the girl not to be angry for his behavior, and in order to compensate for her bad mood, he was ready to buy whatever she wanted. While the girl listened to Michael's words, a voiceover announced the successful activation of the game, and said that the reward for completing the action would also be gain points, which can be spent on improving one's strength, dexterity, and spirit. Having heard the cherished words about shopping, the girl did not really believe that such a nondescript guy had at least some means, but she stated this, just in case, with caution and a touch of humor. Michael examined the slender body of Angelica, who was listed at the Institute as the first beauty of the art department. And without hesitation, he answered that the girl should just try to ask and not throw around words out of ignorance. After these words, the girl said that she wanted to treat all the students of her faculty, and therefore she needed financial help. She thought to herself that this beggar was simply trying not to disgrace himself in the eyes of others, and she needed to disgrace him. But before she had time to finish her thought, she received a notification on her phone that $1,000 had been transferred to her account. This forced Angelica to voice the amount, which attracted the attention of supermarket visitors, while Michael stood there and thought that $1,000 was not such a big amount. The pleasantly surprised girl concluded that she had come across a real rich man. Such a fat wallet definitely could not be missed, and Angelica had already formed an action plan. Turning Michael's phone towards her, she quickly added herself to him as a friend on the social network with quick movements of her fingers. And then, almost getting close to the face of Michael, who had not yet gotten used to his new role, the girl said that she wanted to take a walk with him to the same place, where she would see how long he would last. The evening city lived its own vibrant nightlife. Heading to one of the most expensive boutiques, Angelica said that she was not a materialistic girl at all, but wanted to understand how serious the young man was towards her. And Michael only thought that the more money she spent, the greater his own winnings would be. So the words about seriousness and commercialism did not really bother him. Michael said out loud that he was ready to do anything for Angelica, and she could choose any things without denying herself anything. They were already inside the boutique when the newly rich man, looking at women's handbags, suddenly heard a very familiar voice behind him. It was Veronica who, standing in front of her old new boyfriend, tried on a new handbag. Michael looked carefully at the face of the one who just a couple of hours ago exchanged him for another and abandoned him in the middle of a dark street. Michael loved this girl, and notes of true sadness now crept into his soul. Noticing the young man's attention towards the other girl, Angelica quickly reminded herself, saying that now was probably not the time, since his ex was here. To which the young man replied that this could not interfere with them at all, and the girl could calmly continue to choose things for herself. Satisfied with the successful circumstances, Angelica turned to the consultant with a question about the availability of a fashionable handbag for sale, which was the subject of everyone's attention at the spring show of new models. To which the consultant responded positively, saying that the last such handbag was now being tried on by another girl, pointing in Veronica's direction. At that moment, Veronica noticed Michael and, thinking that he was continuing to pursue her, decided to teach him a lesson, disgracing him in front of everyone in the store for being a beggar. Turning to her boyfriend, whose name was Mason, she asked if he remembered that she would have a birthday soon. To which Mason noted with surprise that the girl celebrated her birthday quite recently. To which the resourceful Veronica stated that then there was a holiday according to the lunar calendar, and now she will celebrate her birthday according to the solar one. Mason, who found himself in a hopeless situation, began to say that he did not like materialistic girls and asked if Veronica was with him now for the sake of money. This statement took the girl by surprise, and she could not find what to answer. At that moment, Angelica approached her from behind and carefully took the purse in her hand. Taking advantage of the girl's confusion, Angelica took her purse with a light and agile movement. And Michael, without wasting any time, paid for the purchase at that very moment. And while the satisfied girl was enjoying the new thing, the voiceover announced 3 times that she was adding plus 20 points to the girl's position. Michael also beamed with happiness, having immediately received plus 60 points just for buying some kind of handbag, and deciding that at this rate it would not be difficult to achieve the desired result. At the same time, he mentally noted that his personal financial benefit from the transactions could have been greater. Looking at the homely-looking rich man in the face of Michael, the store consultants recalled the words of the director that one should not be biased towards people based only on their appearance, and Veronica, who had lost her purse, stood with her eyes lowered to the floor. Angelica, on the contrary, was happy, noting that both the purse and the guy with the money were now taken by a better owner than Veronica. She looked in fascination at the simple guy looking at the handbags, and again came to the idea that this jackpot should not be missed. Approaching Michael, she gently grabbed his hand and began to thank him for his generosity, calling him dear, which the young man did not expect and was a little embarrassed. Veronica looked at this whole scene with tears in her eyes. Saying that this young man's behavior had crossed all boundaries, Veronica pushed Michael away and rushed out of the store. But he mentally noted that this was just the beginning. At that moment, a familiar voice announced that Veronica is the second object, and currently her attitude towards the master is -10. Listening to this, Michael watched as Mason took off from his seat, and he ran after the girl, rushing away from the boutique, where none of the participants in the action heard how Michael was promised a reward of 20 gain points when Veronica's attitude towards the owner reaches 96 points. And Angelica, who did not miss her chance, clung to the young man, asking where they would go now, to which Michael, who had a taste of the game, replied that only where he could spend money, since he would never believe that one handbag would be enough for a girl. In one boutique, Michael pointed out the most expensive dress. In the other, for the most elegant and incredibly expensive jewelry. And everywhere he invariably paid with the very card that appeared to him after he agreed to participate in the game. Being in some kind of positive state of shock, Angelica, of course, did not hear how the voiceover announced that her disposition towards the master had improved by another 5 points. Buying new expensive perfume, and another 5 points are added to your favor. Then the cosmetics department, and again 5 points added to Angelica's location. Numerous clothing boutiques also invariably added favorability points. Finally, the girl herself said that she's probably had enough this time, because all this simply won't fit into her small apartment. To which Michael simply replied that this was not a problem, since he would immediately buy the girl a new spacious apartment. However, the girl suddenly said that this would somehow be too much, because this was their first meeting where she just wanted to joke, and Michael was immediately announced that the girl's favor had dropped by -5 points. This forced the young man to be distracted from searching for an apartment, where he came to the conclusion that the application to purchase an apartment was indeed unnecessary, and only frightened the girl. He quickly found himself approaching Angelica and naming her full details: the department where she studies, her favorite color, zodiac sign, favorite food, and favorite movie, which left her completely confused. Then he said that he was very passionate about her, which made him behave so recklessly. Having finished his speech, he turned to the store consultant and asked to open an account in Angelica's name, where he would deposit $50,000, and asked to offer her only the best the next time she visited the store. And again he turned to Angelica, saying that in this way he hoped to make amends to her for his bad joke about buying an apartment. Blushing from everything that happened for 1 minute, the girl stood unable to say anything. And Michael, who continued to play his role, came close to her and whispered in her ear that if the girl was embarrassed by his gifts, then she could offer him something in return. This had the desired effect, and the girl finally came to life, pushing the young man away and jokingly calling him a pervert, which prompted the announcement that plus 30 points had been added to the girl's favor. Michael, not noticing the admiring glances of the consultants, literally ready to throw themselves on his neck, concluded that if you are rich, then you will get away with anything. And Angelica suddenly asked why the young man shouldn't think about himself after he bought her so many gifts. To which Michael simply and without a twinge of conscience replied that he did not have money to buy things for himself. The dazzling Angelica gently took the young man by the hand, and saying that now it was her turn to give gifts, pulled the young man along with her, looking at him with an alluring gaze. First, the girl took him to boutiques with men's clothing, and then they started doing the young man's hair, and so after all these manipulations, a completely different person appeared on the street. Angelica enthusiastically noted how attractive this young man really is, and Michael himself said that he now feels somehow strange and not very confident. To which Angelica, approaching the young man, said in a gentle voice, and with no less gentle movements, that there was nothing strange, and they made a very beautiful couple. But then she let go of his hand and began to move away. Throwing a goodbye kiss, the girl said that they would see each other later, and that she was so happy today that she almost decided that she had fallen in love. And Michael was told that according to the results of today's meeting at Angelica, her disposition had become plus 68 points. There were fewer and fewer illuminated windows in the dorm. Opening the door to the room, Michael entered shining like a new scent, whose appearance made his neighbors surprised. When asked what he was doing all this time, Michael replied that he went on a date with Angelica, to which his neighbors began vying with each other to be indignant that he had not yet decided anything with Veronica, but was already dating Angelica, who, moreover, was the first beauty of her faculty. Then one of the guys approached Michael and said that Angelica was not a girl on his level, where the young man did not have enough finances for her, and was immediately awarded gratitude from Michael for his friendly advice. After listening to his friend, the young man began to read new messages, where Veronica wrote that she chose Mason only because her mother was now sick and she really needed money, and without hesitation he transferred her $10,000. At the same moment, in the women's building of the dormitory, an exclamation of surprise sounded so loud that it was heard far beyond the dormitory. That was the surprise of Veronica, who stated that as soon as she mentioned the money, Michael immediately transferred the required amount. Her friend asked if this was the same Michael with whom Veronica broke up, to which the latter answered positively and added that she needed to get rid of Mason, who couldn't even buy her a bag and take Michael into circulation. She began quickly typing one message after another on her cell phone. She asked where the young man got so much money, what kind of relationship he had with Angelica, and whether he still had any feelings for her, for Veronica. Meanwhile, Michael, having heard the announcement that a +5 had been added to Veronica's disposition, began to think that Angelica turned out to be not as selfish as Veronica. Deciding not to answer the girl for now, the young man began to look for places where he could still spend money on girls. And so he found what he needed, an online broadcast of one famous blogger, Mirinda, who accepted financial assistance for herself. Michael's joy knew no bounds, because he found himself in the right place to spend a lot of money, which he did not hesitate to do. Having seen the transfer from a user under the name Lone Wolf, Mirinda, not yet familiarizing herself with the amount, sent him words and a token of gratitude. But when the amount was shown on the screen, not only the blogger girl was shocked, but also everyone who was now watching her online broadcast. The comments from the audience were not long in coming, noting the appearance of a rich man here and asking him to give him some money. But instead of responding to these meaningless comments, Michael decided that it would be nice to make another translation and pressed the appropriate button on the screen of his mobile phone. Meanwhile, in the office of the online broadcasting company, where Mirinda worked, a real commotion began. The project manager literally flew into the boss's office without knocking, and with a wild expression on his face, shouted that some rich man had just transferred $1 million to Mirinda. The boss's reaction was not long in coming, where he suggested that this was either fraud or money laundering. Meanwhile, other girls who also conducted online broadcasts from this company vied with each other to try to write to the Lone Wolf, telling each other how this rich man had just transferred $1 million to Mirinda. Mirinda herself could not believe that she had just received a transfer of $1 million. The director did not hesitate to appear, who with signs indicated the boss's instructions to take this rich viewer into circulation. But Mirinda stated that she could not talk about it, since she herself would not let such a goldfish go anywhere. After blowing a kiss, the girl told the Lone Wolf to send her a private message so that she could receive her well-deserved gratitude. But the Lone Wolf did not respond to either this or any of the following messages, because Michael had long since fallen into a sound, healthy sleep. A new clear and warm day arrived, and the first rays of the sun illuminated the walls of the men's dormitory. Having woken up, Michael lazily read the correspondence in the general chat about how a certain rich man had appeared in online broadcasts yesterday. And while the young man was washing his face and brushing his teeth, he noted that his transfers yesterday had no effect on Mirinda, because there was no notification about adding her to the system, nor about the accrual of favor points. He was just thinking that probably, in order for the system to recognize a new girl, a personal meeting was needed, when he discovered a huge number of messages from various girls who offered to meet him. However, almost immediately he noticed the commotion his comrades were making as they left the room and asked what had happened. to which they explained to him that they were rushing to an open lesson in order to have time to take the best seats, which would allow them to fully enjoy Jessica's beauty. She was an incredibly beautiful girl whom literally all the guys at school dreamed of. And Michael also remembered this girl in great detail, the location of which all the university guys dreamed of. After all, Jessica was famous as a very educated and cultured girl, developing literally in all areas. She was the chairman of the Students' Association. Her musical talent for playing the piano left no one indifferent. Jessica did not lag behind in more dynamic sports, where she diligently studied ballet and became a state champion in fencing. While Michael was turning over in his head all the merits of this university beauty, he was noticed by students sitting nearby, who assumed that he had transferred from another group, since they had not seen him here before. But the young man didn't care about them. He was thinking about how to establish contact with Jessica, who constantly keeps only in her own company, and for 3 years no one has managed to even just talk to her. And then Veronica and her neighbor noticed him, where the neighbor, whose name was Inga, noted that Michael had dressed up well, which was probably intended to please Veronica. And at the same moment it was announced that plus 10 points had been added to Veronica's disposition. Glancing sideways in the direction where the girl was, Michael noted to himself that Veronica was really some kind of superficial woman, since her position improved only because he had dressed up a little. But throwing away unnecessary thoughts, the young man tried to focus on how he could meet and add Jessica to the system, from which he was distracted by loud exclamations from the left side of the audience. It was one of the guys who suffers from excessive self-confidence and arrogance, who loudly declared that he was about to get Jessica's phone number. Jessica's attention was also attracted by such statements, which made her very surprised. But she didn't even have time to say a word when a self-confident guy, whose name was Greg, was already nearby and invited the girl to get to know each other better and exchange contacts. But his unceremonious actions only confused Jessica herself, but her roommate who was nearby was not very pleased with this behavior of the young man. Greg, without wasting any time, moved closer and closer to Jessica, saying that they would be a good couple and they should start dating. But suddenly, with a sharp movement, someone's hand pulled the guy away from the girl. It was Jessica's roommate, Kate, who raised her hand over the guy's head, accompanying her actions with the words that he should not dare to come close to her friend. Watching the sharp end of the pen above his head, Greg began hastily making excuses that he just wanted to join the student association, and Kate misunderstood him. Saying that this was the stupidest excuse to approach the girl, Kate sent the failed gentleman away. But not even a few seconds had passed before the attention of both girls was attracted by another voice, asking Jessica to add him as a friend on a social network, which surprised them a lot. It was Michael, who had already prepared his phone for exchanging contact information. Kate noted out loud that this guy was at least cute and sarcastically inquired about his intention to join the student society. But Michael said as honestly and openly as possible that he was not at all concerned about all these student associations, which prompted the question of why he needed Jessica's contacts at all. Delaying the moment of answer, the young man first said that this should be more than obvious to everyone. But without making much of a pause, he immediately added that he just wanted to date Jessica. Jessica immediately blushed at what was said and didn't know how to respond to such frankness. Moreover, all the people in the audience were shocked by Michael's directness. The result of this frankness was not long in coming and was extremely unexpected for everyone, where the unapproachable Jessica suddenly took out her phone and said that she wouldn't mind trying. Veronica looked angrily at everything that was happening, where Inga, standing next to her, added fuel to the fire, asking the girl whether Michael should be her personal dog and run after her all the time. Meanwhile, Michael, enjoying the victory, concluded that simply that in communication it was not so bad and had just borne fruit. And suddenly there was an announcement that a new target had been added in the person of Jessica, whose location was currently equal to 0. At the end of the lecture, Michael and his comrades and neighbors left the educational building, where the young people accompanying him expressed words of congratulations regarding the establishment of relations with Jessica. They asked him, after closer communication with her, to introduce them to her friends, to which Michael replied that it was too early to think and talk about it. A rather rude call made the young man turn away from the conversation and turn around. It was Greg and his henchman who expressed his misunderstanding and dissatisfaction with how Michael managed to get the contact of the first beauty of the university. To which the young man simply replied that Greg should not embarrass himself now more than what had already happened in the audience. This statement infuriated Michael's opponent, but his impulse towards physical violence was restrained by his comrades, recalling the words of the police after the last arrest that next time they would face prison. Michael was about to continue on his way when his attention was attracted by the familiar voice of Angelica, who said that she had been waiting to meet him for a very long time. This statement by the first beauty of the Faculty of Arts shocked everyone on the street, and Michael, without being at a loss, said that in order to compensate for the girl's wait, he would treat her to dinner. But the girl refused dinner and asked if the young man liked the way she looked with the things he bought her, to which Michael noticed that she looked simply amazing, especially with that handbag. Veronica listened to all this, huddled among the crowd of students, feeling feelings of jealousy and annoyance raging inside her. Meanwhile, Angelica took Michael's arm, and together they walked away from the walls of the university, continuing their dialogue and leaving behind the shocked crowd. And Greg, also watching what was happening, literally with tears in his eyes, wondered what was wrong with him. Veronica couldn't stop her tears either, asking herself many questions, including why Angelica was better than her and why Michael made such a choice. The time was approaching evening, and the sun gradually began to sink lower and lower. Angelica suddenly stopped her movement and, turning to face Michael, showed him her recent work. It was a portrait of Michael, where the girl explained that she had stayed up late to finish it. She insisted that the young man take the gift, where she stated that she would not forgive him if he threw away the portrait. The young man was shocked by this attitude because this was the first gift from a girl in his entire life. Satisfied with the reaction, Angelica smiled sweetly and asked if the young man liked the portrait. For a while, Michael just silently looked at the portrait, not showing any emotion. But gradually some thoughts began to form in his head. He remembered the girl's previous attention to him regarding his clothes and his appearance, the air kiss, and now this gift, and decided that these were just tricks on her part so that he would fall into her network. The young man concluded that Angelica specially developed such a plan immediately after he spent several thousand on her. Smiling evilly, Michael concluded that he was no longer the same as before and would not fall for all these tricks. The girl, observing the changes in the facial expressions of the young man, mentally noted that he did not look joyful. Finally, Michael, portraying the most indifferent expression on his face, asked why he needed this picture. This reaction of the young man greatly confused the girl, who simply did not know how to respond to this. And Michael suddenly shortened the distance and asked how the girl intended to pay for all the gifts he had given. And at the same moment, with a deft movement, he snatched the piece of paper with the portrait from Angelica's hands. With his other hand, he stopped the movement of the girl's hand, which tried to take away the sheet of paper. Indecently shortening the distance again, he said that he liked the girl herself more than her gift, which made her cheeks turn pink. Angelica felt how she literally dissolved in the most pleasant feelings when this young man was nearby, when he touched her. And at that moment, the voiceover announced to Michael that +5 points had been added to the girl's disposition. Pleased with himself, Michael was preparing to continue his onslaught, which was already bringing the girl into ecstasy. But suddenly their almost complete embrace was broken by a guy who rushed between them. He, turning to Angelica, reproached her for refusing to go for a walk with him under the pretext of going for a manicure with a friend, while she was hugging some stranger. Unable to restrain himself, this young man expressed one claim after another. Pointing at Michael, he stated that she only lets this guy hug her because he has money. And Michael was very familiar with this behavior of the young man, and he immediately realized that this young man was a fan of Angelica. Meanwhile, the girl, enraged by the guy's behavior, began to shout angrily that he was no one to her at all, and he shouldn't care about who she hugs or what she does. But the escalation of the conflict was interrupted by the intervention of Michael, who introduced himself to the guy, asked his name, and inquired about how long he had been trying to court Angelica. The young man replied that his name was Tommy. He was also studying at the Faculty of Arts and had been trying to attract the girl's attention for more than 6 months. This immediately reminded Michael of himself, where he had been chasing the same girl for 3 whole years. He told this story to his new acquaintance, telling how he had to work 4 jobs and eat whatever he could in order to satisfy the selfish needs of his passion. And finishing his sad story, he added that in the end, this girl still chose to get into someone else's Mercedes. Tommy was clearly shocked by such a story, which left him without any hope of the attention of a girl like Angelica. And Michael reinforced what was said with good friendly advice, saying that those who do this to them only motivate them to become better. After which he urged him to return to the hostel and forget about Angelique, who herself would come running to him sooner or later, having seen his successes in life. The girl did not understand at all what was happening now, watching the action in surprise. She approached Michael saying that Tommy was just an acquaintance of hers, and she had never even considered him as a romantic partner. To which the young man replied that he did not care at all about what the girl might have had with this guy in the past. And then Michael, saying that the girl did not respect either herself or him, began to tear the portrait right in front of her face, causing great amazement in the girl. Having torn a sheet of paper into small pieces and throwing them into the air, Michael turned around and walked away from the girl, saying that until she understood her surroundings and learned to communicate, it was better for them not to meet. He thought to himself that he was very interested in how the girl would react to such an attitude on his part and what she would do. And the girl's thoughts were filled with memories of how Michael treated her at their first meeting. After all, no one had ever been so kind and condescending to her. With tears in her eyes, the girl concluded that Michael really liked her, and now she ruined everything. And it was announced to the departing Michael that plus 5 points had been added to Angelica's disposition. Studying statistics along the way, the young man concluded that the worse you treat a girl, the more she begins to like her. He decided that he was done with Angelica for now and needed to start winning over Jessica. And suddenly he discovered that Jessica also broadcasts online, specializing in music and dance. Michael found this activity very cute and suggested that this girl could only pretend to be cold and unapproachable, but in fact she was quite sweet and open. But before he could appear online, Miranda immediately began writing him messages that she was very glad to see him, but was in no hurry to agree to the offer to meet. From which Michael, of course, concluded that the girl was simply trying to scam him out of money, promising to dance for him online today. Suddenly, he received a notification that the user he was following would now take part in a competition with another user. Michael became very interested in who the inaccessible first beauty of the university, Jessica, would compete with. The rival turned out to be Miranda, who concluded that she accidentally called a new girl, which means victory is in her pocket. The young man found this particular set of circumstances quite interesting, where the experienced and also not deprived of beauty, Miranda competes with the novice blogger and the first beauty, Jessica. Miranda, absolutely confident in her victory, stated that her rival should not even try to compete with her, since behind her was the support of such an influential person as a lone wolf. From her experience of catching rich people, Miranda came to the conclusion that she should no longer have the wolf on her hook. And then the program issued a notification that the lone wolf user had made a transfer. But imagine her rage when she saw that the translation was not addressed to her at all. $5 million were sent and transferred to the account of Miranda's opponent, Jessica, which shocked Jessica herself. Annoyed by this turn of events, Miranda bit her lips, wondering why the wolf chose the new girl. The director did not hesitate to appear, demanding that the boss give an explanation as to why the money was going to others. Collecting her thoughts, Miranda said goodbye to the audience, saying that she had urgent matters and needed to run. And Michael, looking at the icon informing about the user's vacation, voiced to himself that Miranda shouldn't have played with him because he can support anyone. He then switched to Jessica's channel. Mentally, he told her that he had spent a lot of money on her and the girl should not disappoint him. Meanwhile, in the office of an already well-known company that provides a platform for online broadcasts, its manager was again reported about a huge translation, where the project manager said that this unknown lone wolf showed up again and broke the previous record 5 times. Having learned this information, the boss flew into a wild rage, declaring that this guy was probably some kind of oil tycoon. And the rest of the envious women who conduct their online broadcasts noted Michael's translation, concluding that today the lone wolf is in a musical mood. And then, clearly not having any depth of thought, They all began to call their assistants one by one to carry their musical instruments. And the time was already approaching late evening, where the sun had already disappeared behind the horizon, and the darkness of the night gradually began to descend on the city. Jessica sat at her musical instrument, shocked by the events that had happened, and Kate couldn't get enough of the fact that it was all online and now they could become popular. But the heroine of today was not very happy with the prospect of becoming popular and making various men happy with her appearance. She said that the most important thing for a woman is a career and independence, both financially and in all other aspects of life. Frustrated by her friend's attitude to the issue of popularity, Kate told her not to teach her about life. And immediately after these words, she secretly asked if Jessica knew the rich man who sent the money today. To which the girl angrily replied that she did not know him and should not know him. But immediately after that, with obvious interest in the person of this rich man, she said that he really sent a lot of money, for which she needed to write him a few words of gratitude. And Kate, while collecting equipment, thought with disappointment that her friend had said one thing, but was doing exactly the opposite. Suddenly, a wild scream from her friend made the girl literally jump on the spot and drop all the equipment. Unable to swear, she turned around and saw that nothing critical had happened, and could only quietly ask the question of what had happened. To which Jessica responded in confusion that she apparently knew who the lone wolf really was, where she came to the conclusion that it was Michael. Immediately, the girl remembered the story of one boy who was the son of a very rich and successful man, but at the same time he was modest and did not want to show his wealth and high position. He received the best education, but realized that he did not want to be the object of everyone's attention and wanted to live freely. One day he met a beautiful girl, fell in love with her and decided to win her favor, but as an ordinary poor person. But the girl's friend listened to this story without enthusiasm and only said that she had reread romance novels. The girl began to worry very much about this poor boy, who since childhood was surrounded by the best, and now it is probably very difficult for him to pretend to be a simple person. Michael, meanwhile, managed to take a shower in his dorm. Having almost finished drying himself, the young man noticed that a message had arrived on his phone. Taking the phone, Michael, not without surprise, noted that Jessica invited him to have dinner together without even asking where he got so much money from, and decided to check on her. The second half of the next, as usual, sunny day was already in full swing. Michael was on his way to a date with Jessica, where he chose a moped as his means of transport. He stopped near the women's hostel, where a certain man had already parked his luxury car. This man was the first to start the conversation, saying that he was waiting for his girlfriend and asking Michael who he was waiting for. At that moment, the young man saw Jessica appear on the street, looking around, apparently in search of Michael. And then the young man, pointing at her, answered the man that this was the same girl he was waiting for here. This statement greatly amused the man, where he said that with such a beauty, he himself had a better chance than a guy who did not even have the means to buy a good car. Meanwhile, Jessica saw a young man waiting for her. She continued to believe in her fantasy, where Michael seemed to her to be a secret rich man who was hiding from everyone. Intoxicated by her fantasies, the girl quickly headed towards him. Meanwhile, the man was busy telling Michael about how he had to work hard and then, maybe in 15-20 years, such a girl would get into his car. While this narrative of success continued, Jessica had already managed to approach Michael and took a place on the moped behind him. The man didn't even have time to understand anything when a moped rushed past him, on which a guy and a gorgeous girl rushed towards new impressions from each other. The man silently looked after the vehicle speeding off into the distance, and then emotions took over, where he, falling to his knees, lamented the fact that his whole life, aimed at obtaining large incomes, turned out to be meaningless, which this situation with a beauty who sat on some kind of moped had just shown him. Jessica didn't see herself on a simple moped. She saw an expensive bike and a prince in a white suit at its wheel. Her fantasies were dispelled by Michael's voice that they had arrived and the sight of the establishment where he had brought them. It was one of the cheapest fast food places in the city, which people of Jessica's level didn't really notice. And the main dish in this establishment was spicy crayfish and shrimp. Before sitting down at the table, Michael placed a napkin in front of the girl. which again evoked in her the most positive emotions based on her fantasies, where she thought that even in the guise of a simple guy, he did not forget the manners instilled in him from childhood. She also gratefully accepted from him a package of disposable gloves, in which it is customary to eat crayfish and shrimp so as not to get your hands dirty. And so a minute later, Michael was happily eating the shrimp, and the girl, continuing to live in her fantasies, noted that these are probably the smallest shrimps that he is forced to eat for her sake, so that she does not feel awkward in an expensive restaurant. And at that moment, when Jessica once again imagined the prince in the person of Michael, the latter was told that plus 10 points had been added to the girl's disposition. Michael was quite surprised that the location rating had suddenly been added, and Jessica had already taken one shrimp and began to peel it, after which the girl held out the peeled shrimp to Michael's mouth and asked him to open his mouth. Giving him her almost loving look, the girl asked the young man to let her feed him. Michael was completely bewildered by what was happening, but he did not resist and accepted kindness and tenderness from the girl, just at the moment when Veronica entered the cafe, accompanied by Mason. Before she could take a step, Veronica noticed Michael and Jessica sitting at the table. She couldn't believe that she had witnessed the unapproachable Jessica feeding Michael from her hands. At the same time, the girl began to think about what was happening with Michael, who just yesterday was leaving accompanied by Angelica, and today he is already in the company of another girl. Not wanting to be in front of her ex, she asked Mason to choose another cafe, saying that there were too many people there. But her companion did not heed the girl's requests, making the correct assumption that she simply did not want to meet her friends. Having said that he would figure everything out now, Mason, literally placing his hand on Veronica, walked with her to the table where Michael was. Michael, who had just taken the shrimp from Jessica's hand, noticed a shadow looming over him from behind. Then he heard his name and saw bills falling in front of his face, after which Mason said that Michael should take these $500 and get out of this cafe. The young man looked at the bills that had fallen both on the table and into the plates of food, and the only thing that came to his mind was that Mason's behavior was extremely ridiculous and did not do him any credit. Throwing another stack of not very large bills, Mason said that now it should definitely be enough for Michael to get away from here. And Jessica suddenly squeezed her purse so hard that her finger bones even cracked. This did not go unnoticed by Michael, who could not understand why the girl was so angry. And the reason for Jessica's anger was Mason, who was now ruining her perfect date, and to whom she sent all imaginable and inconceivable curses. But Mason did not let up, saying that if it was not enough, he could add more, accompanying the words with the movement of his fingers, taking out another stack of banknotes from his wallet and throwing them into the air. Suddenly, someone's hand suddenly fell on the bills lying on the table. The waiter arrived in time and offered Mason to give all this money to him in exchange for organizing another table for him. Roughly grabbing the waiter by the clothes, the man began to say that he did not want any other table other than this one. But his speech was interrupted by a sweeping blow from a woman's handbag right in the face, which did not go in vain on a couple of his teeth. At Michael's surprised look, Jessica hastened to say that this was not her doing. And behind them, a huge silhouette appeared, which called Mason a scumbag, living on her money, driving his car, and, as it turns out, also sleeping with other girls using her money. Michael was literally shaken by the sight of this scary, huge woman behind him. And Mason, holding the bruised place, asked his wife Goldie what she was doing here. To which the terrible woman, terribly distorting her face and accompanying her speech with choice abuse, replied that if she had not been here, she would never have known that he was sleeping with others. And Mason suddenly began to say that Goldie was all he had, that she was the only one, that he owed her everything and didn't even think about other girls, which, having already understood the essence of what was happening, Veronica looked at with reproach. Suddenly, Mason grabbed Veronica by the hair and began accusing her that it was her fault, that she was the one who tried to seduce him. To which the girl tried to justify herself by saying that the man himself began to court her and said that he did not have a partner. With a furious demand to shut up, Mason gave the girl a strong slap in the face. Not at all expecting such a turn of events, Veronica fell to the floor and looked in fear at the angry man. But Mason did not let up. Having entered into the role of the victim on whom the feminine charms had been tested, he had already raised his hand for a new blow, However, someone's hand stopped his movement. It was Michael, who said that a man only disgraces himself by beating a woman in front of the entire cafe. So continuing to sit on the floor and clutching her cheek that was burning from the blow, Veronica suddenly realized that Michael still loved her. Meanwhile, Michael was told that Veronica's favor had increased by 60 points and that her favor had reached the maximum possible level. After which the voiceover said that Veronica is a fan of the master. The amount of Michael's personal financial benefit from spending on the girl is $5,000, and 20 gain points were also awarded. Without hesitation, the young man gave the order to use 10 points to improve his physical characteristics. And at the same moment, with a deft movement of his hand, he performed a trick on Mason by bending his arm behind his back, which made the latter howl, after which he pushed him away from himself. But the restless man was not going to admit defeat, grabbing the bottle that stood on one of the tables. Screaming and swearing, he swung it over the young man's head. But for Michael, who had improved his physical characteristics, Mason moved too slowly. With one short lunge forward, the young man literally swept the enemy out of his way. Michael said to Mason, kneeling in front of him, that there is no shame in being supported by a woman, but there is a shame in raising a hand against a woman. But these words flew past the ears of the disgraced man, who did not want to put up with the loss and began to take a knife out of his pocket. Seeing the bladed weapon, Jessica shouted to her companion to be careful, and the enraged man had already managed to straighten up and begin to perform a stabbing movement with his hand forward, tightly squeezing his weapon. But it was not difficult for the pumped-up young man to leave the line of attack, simultaneously grabbing the enemy's hand and knocking the knife out of it. Where immediately after this, without giving the enemy a second to somehow come to his senses and react, Michael used a technique that wrestlers call a throw over the back. The sound of the splat on the floor seemed to be audible even on the street, and so Mason lay unconscious on the floor, defeated by the brave young man who defended the girl's honor. The winner himself, modestly placing his hands in his trouser pockets, headed towards the exit, where Jessica followed him. But suddenly his movement was interrupted by Veronica, who, grabbing his leg, said that she was wrong towards him and asked him to give her another chance. For a moment, Michael thought about it, but quickly pulled himself together and began to speak. He reminded the girl of how he dragged her several kilometers to the hospital when she got hurt. He remembered how he worked tirelessly for 6 months to give her a new phone, which she refused because it was not the latest model. He also remembered that he had always known about her frivolity and commercialism, but stubbornly believed that sooner or later she would notice him and appreciate his efforts. Concluding his speech, Michael said that Veronica had a lot of time and chances. Now the Michael who ran for her has died, and the girl has made her choice. Tears of grief and despair welled up in Veronica's eyes, because every word of the young man was the truth, which, as we know, always hits hard, where the pain from its blows is always stronger than physical pain. Once on the street, Michael apologized to his companion for everything that happened, which ruined their date, to which Jessica playfully replied that everything was great, and she had a unique chance to see the young man from the other side. Such words from the girl greatly embarrassed Michael, but at the same time they were pleasant to him. And Jessica, unable to take her eyes off the young man and replaying the events of today's date in her head, was firmly convinced that this guy could still surprise her with many things. Soon the sky over the city was covered with black thunderclouds, and the downpour did not take long to arrive. The door to the dorm room swung open very suddenly, as if it had been kicked with all its might. So Veronica returned to the room after an unsuccessful evening, where the neighbor who met her lamented the fact that the girl did not have an umbrella with her, and she was all wet. The greeter hastened to tell the news that yesterday Jessica received as much as $5 million from Michael, which infuriated the already very upset girl, who asked where such information came from. To which the friend explained that Jessica's neighbor had spilled the beans about it. Digesting the new information, Veronica fell into some sort of stupor for a few seconds, and finally she reached her psychological limit and burst into tears. Her sobs were accompanied by such loud sounds that in the neighboring rooms of the dorm, unfriendly statements were constantly heard addressed to the one who was interfering with her rest. Meanwhile, in the room where Michael lived, his neighbors were surprised that their friend was very good at playing video games, suggesting that he was a secret e-sports player. And Michael himself thought that after the distribution of reinforcement points, even playing games became very easy, but he said out loud that he was just lucky. While his friends were offering him business ideas, like the one to broadcast their games online, Michael got ready to go to the shower. In the shower, he saw the direct effect of the enhancement glasses, expressed in the clearly visible relief of the muscles on his body. He also noticed that his facial features had changed, becoming more fit and courageous. Looking at his body in the mirror, the young man could only think about the fact that now he had to avoid taking shortcuts with the girls. He was distracted from admiring himself by the call of his neighbors, who shouted that his phone was ringing. Michael, coming out of the shower, took the phone. It turned out that the first beauty of the Faculty of Arts, the beautiful Angelica, was calling him. In his thoughts, the young man came to the conclusion that this cunning girl had come up with something new to lure money from him and win him over, which means he needs to be on his guard. Picking up the phone, Michael asked the girl the purpose of her call. But loud sobs and screams that were heard in the speaker of the phone literally forced the young man to pull the receiver away from his ear. The apartment where Angelica lived was in another part of the city. There were new things scattered all over the room, the labels from which had not even been torn off yet. The girl herself was sitting in the middle of the room on her knees on the floor, bowing her head. Unable to stop her tears, Angelique asked Michael to lend her $500,000. She began to say that her father had always been addicted to gambling. And then one day he lost big, bandits came to them and took everything they had, after which their previously well-off family found themselves at the very bottom. In the end, the girl added that she was not selfish at all. It's just that their family has a lot of debts that need to be repaid. Having listened to the end, Michael simply hung up without saying anything in response, which surprised the girl. But a moment later, a message arrived on the girl's phone, after reading which Angelica was simply shocked because $5 million had been deposited into her account. And Michael sent her a voice message that he just accidentally made a mistake by 10. Clutching the phone with the treasured message to her chest, Angelica swore to herself that she must definitely thank Michael. The rain outside was getting heavier. Michael sat in his room, annoyed that despite everything, Angelica's position did not reach the foot level and amounted to 94 points. It was necessary to come up with something, to act in a different way and perhaps directly. He remembered the treatise The Art of War by Sun Tzu, where one of the rules was that the enemy must be forced to act when he hesitates. By morning, the rain had stopped, the clouds had cleared, and a nice, warm, sunny day was shaping up. Michael walked from the hostel to the academic buildings, accompanied by one of his neighbors. Suddenly, he heard a woman's voice calling out to him. It was Veronica, who, handing him a package, said that she had prepared lunch for him and offered to go to lectures together. But before Michael had time to say a word in response, another female voice attracted his attention from the other side. It was Angelica, who, holding out a special thermos for food, said that she had also prepared a delicious lunch for him, because she thought that he was probably already tired of eating in the student canteen. And then the eyes of the two girls met, not foreshadowing anything good for each other. And Michael stood between them, dumbfounded, and did not know what to do or what to say. At this very moment, when the situation seemed to be heating up to the limit, Michael heard another call behind him. The young man slowly turned around, and his amazement knew no bounds. Behind him stood Jessica, who said that she also brought him lunch, where she chose beef noodles as the lunch dish. At the same moment, not the most friendly glances of other contenders for Michael's attention were directed towards the girl. Where to outside spectators all this seemed like a kind of fight inside the ring. And Michael, taking the bag of food from the girl's hands, asked in surprise how Jessica knew that he liked beef noodles. To which the girl timidly replied that yesterday, when they were eating shrimp, she assumed that the young man liked spicy dishes, where everyone knows that one of the best spicy dishes is noodles with beef. Michael thought to himself that this girl had a clear advantage because of her attentiveness, and he thanked her out loud, saying that it was always nice when someone showed concern. And the prudent Jessica said that gratitude is not required, you just need to always take into account the preferences of the person for whom you are cooking. And the enraged Veronica and Angelica continued to devour the seemingly modest Jessica with their eyes. But no matter how hard they tried to make it look worse, the opponent had already dealt her signature blow, from which all her rivals scattered in different directions without any chance of success. Suddenly, Jessica pulled out a small box and handed it to Michael with words of gratitude. Michael was simply shocked because it was a smartphone of the newest model. The students standing nearby all this time, who witnessed this whole scene with the participation of Michael and the three most beautiful girls of the university, were again shocked that the unapproachable Jessica was giving gifts to this guy. Her rivals experienced no less shock, also wondering about the level of wealth of the girl who could afford to give such an expensive gift. It was a control blow from Jessica, which literally smashed her opponents across the floor. And the girls had no choice but to watch the departing couple. The day was just beginning, where the sun was still gaining its height. Veronica was the first to break the silence after Michael left, telling herself that she just wanted him back, but didn't understand why it had become so difficult. Angelica was able to control herself much better, and she turned to a recent rival who found herself in the same situation with a question about her name and whether they could discuss something with her. To which the girl responded with a sudden outburst of anger, shouting that they had nothing to talk about, and that in general this whole situation had developed because of Angelica. But the enterprising girl, stopping this outburst of rage, said in a soft voice that they should act together, because this is the only way they can effectively resist Jessica, who is taking Michael away from them. Meanwhile, Michael stood not far from Jessica and admired both the gift itself and the personal qualities of the girl who made it. But then he carefully looked first at the girl and then at her level in the system. And at that same moment, the realization came to him that such a low level of disposition in no way fits with her actual actions, where, without information about her disposition, the young man could come to the conclusion that the girl fell in love with him. This means that now all this is delicious food, an expensive phone, nothing more than bait for him. Michael came to the conclusion that this girl is really smart, and her methods are very sophisticated, where the predator allows the prey to think that she is the hunter. After thinking about this, the young man concluded that he needed to find some way to speed up the process of increasing Jessica's favor. Michael was distracted from his thoughts by messages from Miranda, who apologized that last time she was unable to arrange a meeting with him. But this does not mean that she does not want to meet, which greatly amused the young man, who understood all her selfish motives. But then, immediately after Miranda's message, Michael received another one, which contained a link and password to enter the coolest chat room in the city, where the most famous and wealthy people communicated. Having logged into this chat, the first message the young man received was a question about the opportunity to discuss a business proposal. But Michael immediately realized that all these rich people just wanted to test him and decided to play this game with them. He wrote that he was ready to discuss any proposals from his new comrades, to which he immediately received a photograph indicating the location of a rich villa and with an offer to purchase this luxury property. The offer was unexpected, and real estate in that area was indeed worth tens of millions. But Michael wrote that he could ask the price for this house the other day, after which he returned to Jessica's company. Meanwhile, in that very country villa, the following events took place. Quite unexpectedly, having received consent to look at the property, a certain man told his companion that, apparently, this lone wolf was not a deceiver, and he really had money. To which his interlocutor said that this would become clear in the next 2 days. But there is no need to worry in any case, because no matter how you look at it, their team will win, and will either get a new wealthy partner or expose the fraudster. A few minutes later, a message was received on the young man's phone with the address where the pitchfork was located. And then the question arose in his head how much Jessica's position could improve if he gave her such a villa. The next day, Michael and Veronica got out of the taxi and stood in front of the house at the very address that the young man received in a closed chat for a select few. The owner of the house, accompanied by a girl, stood next to the house and looked out for a wealthy buyer. With a wave of his hand, he greeted the young people who got out of the taxi and apologized for not sending a car for them. To which Michael replied that everything was fine and the man had nothing to worry about. And the owner of the house appreciated the simple appearance of the guy and the sophistication of the girl, trying to understand where this simple-looking young man got so much money. But without getting anywhere, the man said that he himself is a businessman, but is currently experiencing some financial difficulties, and therefore decided to sell this luxurious house. After which he invited the young people to go inside. accompanying his invitation with a hand gesture. Then a standard tour of the house began, during which the owner talked about the area and other positive aspects of the house, where the owner took guests and potentially buyers through all the significant parts of his house, not forgetting about the pool. And in the final part, he drew the attention of Michael and Jessica to the gorgeous view from the window, and said that if not for financial problems, he would have ordered that he be buried here too. And then it dawned on the girl that her companion apparently wants to buy this luxurious house, which must cost a lot. Meanwhile, Michael, in his simple-minded manner, said that the house was not bad and asked the owner to simply name the amount he wanted to get for it and not bother with the presentation anymore. The owner of the house would have been happy with an amount of $50 million, but he decided to raise the price a little, leaving room for bargaining, and of course not forgetting to mention that some potential buyers had already expressed serious intentions to purchase the house. Therefore, the price that Michael heard was $60 million. Making the most disinterested expression on his face, the young man said that only $60 million was not a problem for him, and he agreed to buy a house. After these words, the shocked owner of the house mentally reproached himself for not mentioning the amount of $80 million, and his companion could not believe that in this world there are people for whom $60 million is not money. Meanwhile, Michael turned to Jessica, asking her questions about what she thought about this house and whether it was worth purchasing it. The girl, who did not expect such a question, asked a counter-question about why suddenly the young man was interested in her opinion, to which the young man replied in a sweet tone that the reason for such interest was that he was buying the house for her. The seller could now only be amazed at how this unknown rich man buys gifts for $60 million. On the one hand, the girl was infinitely happy to hear this, but on the other, she thought that she was getting some kind of too expensive gift. She immediately imagined that after such a gift, the young man could literally decide that he had become the full owner of her body and maybe her soul. Very carefully, Jessica began to tell Michael that she was very grateful to him for such a gorgeous gift, but precisely because of its high cost, she could not accept it. However, the young man approached her, taking her hand, and began to say that too much real estate was already registered in his name, and the state had recently been introducing new restrictions, so he thought that there would be nothing wrong if one villa was registered on the girl. And in conclusion, Michael added that he still hopes to give the girl this house in the future. Jessica looked at the young man with her fascinated gaze. Her face was burning with a surge of emotions. It was possible to register the house only in the name of the spouse, and thoughts immediately flashed through the girl's head that Michael already saw their future together in marriage. Jessica's happiness knew no bounds, and she completely lost her head. And Michael did not stop his onslaught, saying that he did not see any point in dividing something as belonging to him or her, taking into account the level of their relationship. The girl was smitten by these heartwarming words, and Michael received message after message that points were being added to Jessica's favor. The young man noted for himself that his acting abilities are getting better every day. And at the same time, the girl accompanying the owner of the house, who apparently was connected with him by something more, timidly asked when the man would give her some similar significant expensive gift, at least in the form of an apartment. But the man, realizing that he was not financially capable of such gifts, only laughed absurdly in response. And now the time has come, which is cherished for the owner of the house, to transfer the advance payment. After transferring this, Michael, already saying goodbye, said that he would transfer the remaining $50 million after signing the purchase and sale agreement, with which the owner of the house, of course, agreed, saying that he would prepare all the necessary documents. And so the young people left this luxurious villa and its owners, again calling a taxi. The car with Michael and Jessica inside was moving towards the campus, and the young man sat and calculated in his mind that as soon as Jessica's favor reached the required level, the $60 million spent on the house would turn into his personal $6 million, according to the rules of the system. But the girl had completely different thoughts, which she based on her experience of reading novels, where she believed that the next step on the part of the young man accompanying her now should be to declare his love to her, where it will be close to the wedding, which would be nice to hold somewhere in the Alps. And then they will have a long and happy family life together, children and a common old age, until which they will carefully preserve their feelings for each other. All these dreams and fantasies greatly turned the head of the girl, drunk with feelings. Michael's words that they had arrived at their destination abruptly brought Jessica out of her pleasant fantasies, where she looked out the car window and saw the buildings of the university. Getting out of the car, the girl asked in surprise why Michael didn't come out, to which she immediately received the answer that he had been invited to the gaming club, where he was now heading. After which the car suddenly took off, leaving the girl completely alone. This is not how she saw the continuation of today and stood disappointed that she never received a declaration of love. Soon a taxi brought Michael to one of the gaming clubs in the city. The comrades who met him said that they had been sitting here for a long time and had managed to lose several times while Michael was not with them. Having said that there was nothing wrong with losing, Michael said that there was no need to worry, since he was now compensating for his absence. Approaching the checkout, the young man made a large order for all his friends and acquaintances in this gaming club, asking everyone to extend the playing time, bring soda and cigarettes. But the girl standing behind the cash register suddenly called him by name, where, turning his head, Michael saw Angelica, whom he immediately asked what she was doing here. To which the girl explained that after the young man helped pay off the debts, her father founded a network of gaming clubs, where this club is one of them. After which the joyful girl first said that everything that Michael ordered today would be free for him, but then she changed her mind, saying that it would always be free for him. But before Michael had time to say a word in response, a terrible roar was heard behind him, from which his heart almost jumped out of his chest. Where the source of this noise was not slow to appear in the form of a big guy with a bat on his shoulder, with which he had just broken one of the computers, declaring that he needed his money. Angelica replied that she and her father had already paid back everything they owed, to which the big man said that they had forgotten about the accrued interest. But the girl was not going to give up and stubbornly defended her position, declaring that this was simply some kind of extortion. But the stubborn man suddenly grabbed the girl by the hand, saying that if there is no money, then she will go with him and will work off this money for 2 years in his strip club. The big man didn't even have time to understand how he suddenly lost control of the girl's hand and found himself in an uncomfortable position with his hand behind his back, where Michael, who was holding his hand, accompanied his actions with words telling the man to get out of here. The girl looked at her savior with fascination and joy, saying words of gratitude. At that moment, the entire retinue accompanying him rushed to the aid of his boss, which didn't frighten the young man at all, who had pumping from the system on his side. He only managed to throw punches and kicks in different directions, scattering opponents left and right. This could not go unnoticed by all visitors to the gaming club, including Michael's comrades, where Michael was the last to immediately introduce himself as a certain hero of a computer fighting game with a perfectly executed striking technique. It was as if they were watching in real-life footage of some movie where the main character famously deals with the villains and could not understand when their comrade managed to improve his skills in martial arts so much. And so a minute later, this entire indecent company hastily retreated from the battlefield, taking with them a bunch of bruises, bumps, and broken noses. And Angelica immediately rushed into Michael's arms with words of gratitude to her savior. At the same time, it was announced to the young man that the girl's disposition had reached the required level, which means the owner receives $530,000 out of $5,300,000 spent on her, and so same 5 gain points. Just at that moment, when Michael could not get enough of the award he received, and Angelica was hanging on his neck, Veronica passed by. She attracted the girl's attention by calling her a lying creature. Enraged, Veronica began accusing Angelica of violating the agreement to confront Jessica together and attempting to single-handedly seduce Michael. Seeing that the situation was heating up, Michael instructed the system to spend all the gain points on the speed of his movement and literally disappeared from the scene. After some time, the young man was moving around the sports field, thinking that he had already fulfilled the conditions of the system with 2 girls, which means he urgently needs to find a new girl. Otherwise, he risks being left without income and gain. A light touch on the shoulder attracted the young man's attention, forcing him to leave his thoughts. A charming girl stood in front of him and said that an athletics competition would be held here now, and the young man needed to leave the treadmill. All Michael did was point out how attractive this girl was. Immediately showing his intelligence, the young man said that he would fulfill the girl's request in exchange for her phone number. At this moment, a dissatisfied male voice was heard from the side, which attracted the girl's attention. Where literally a second later, the sweet girl was covered by a certain young man who called himself her boyfriend and rudely suggested that Michael get away. Michael, looking carefully at this guy, thought in his head that his face looked very familiar. And then Michael remembered how this guy beat him because of a girl back in his school years. He beat him when Michael refused to do his homework for him. He just hid it when there was nothing to do. Only one thought flashed through the young man's head, and it was the thought that the world is small and the boomerang law works. And while the girl was leaving with her boyfriend, the system announced to Michael that a new object named Christy had been added with a favorability level of -5, and upon reaching the desired favorability level, the owner would receive, as always, 10% of the investment and 22 gain points, which couldn't help but please Michael since 22 gain points already sounded quite serious. Meanwhile, the start of the competition was approaching, where the athletes were already taking their starting positions. And Christy from the stands shouted words of support to her boyfriend Billy, who sent her various signs of greeting. And the guy sitting next to him with glasses managed to notice that an extra runner had appeared at the edge of the treadmills. The commands to start and attention had already sounded, where the runners took the corresponding pre-start positions, and then a shot sounded from the signal pistol replacing the start command. The race began with Billy jumping ahead, reveling in his complacency and calling those behind him worthless insects. Before he even had time to understand what had happened, Michael rushed right past him at great speed. In just a split second, he left Billy and all the other athletes behind him. Michael ran, mentally communicating with Billy, where he told him that now he would lose in an area where it would seem he had no equal. Well, Billy, meanwhile, as if hearing Michael's thoughts, also mentally said that there was no need to underestimate him. Having stopped, he took off his shoes, which, in his opinion, should have significantly improved his speed, and said that now he would quickly catch up. Glancing around, Billy was just beginning to pick up speed again to run. Suddenly, having managed to make a full circle by this time, Michael rushed past him again, throwing words along the way that it would be better for him to start working with his feet and not with his tongue. Looking after Michael, who was speeding away for another circle, Billy could not believe that he had already managed to make a full circle in such a short time. Michael, again mentally communicating with his opponent, said that Billy had devoted his whole life to hard training, but he could not compare with the capabilities of his system. Meanwhile, a sports event commentator, drawing attention to Michael's speed, began to shout loudly that he had never seen anything like this before, and that even their current champion was unable to withstand such speed. And now, less than a minute after the start of the race, Michael crossed the finish line, becoming its winner. Christy's surprise knew no bounds. She couldn't believe that her boyfriend had lost. Well, Michael was already grabbed by a crowd of fans and thrown into the air as the commentator said that they had all just witnessed the birth of a new champion. When the crowd of fans finally left Michael alone, an athletics coach approached him, who, first noting the young man's extraordinary abilities, invited him to join the national team. Hearing this, Billy almost shouted with tears in his eyes that this place in the national team was reserved for him. Michael, when leaving, fired a control shot, declaring that he was not interested in such an offer at all. The victory, appearance, and behavior of Michael did not leave Christy indifferent, where she noted the strength of spirit and masculinity of the young man. Billy's question about the essence of the girl's thoughts, voiced with a very dissatisfied intonation, brought Christy back to reality. To which she quickly collected herself and replied that she was simply worried about Billy's failure in the competition. And satisfied with revenge, Michael listened with pleasure to the system's messages about Christy's improvement. In parallel with these events, Jessica returned to her room satisfied with the development of events, who, from the threshold and without even letting her neighbor say a word, declared that Michael had given her a house. And while Kate's emotions were raging, Jessica talked about how they went to see this house together. Then the girl began reasoning out loud about how she and Michael needed to plan for the future, as well as threats against the owner of the villa so that he would not change his mind about selling. And Kate, after listening to all this for a while, decided to go online and was shocked by what she saw and read there. On one of the pages of the news section of the university website, a photograph of Michael was posted with the caption that he was the main womanizer of the university. Kate was quick to show this to Jessica, where both girls couldn't understand what it all meant. Michael's roommate also discovered this news and showed it to the young man, where the latter immediately stated that this was complete slander since he was just spending money on girls. To himself, he seriously thought about the fact that someone clearly didn't like the fact that he was so popular. Meanwhile, several guys who were publishing news, sitting in front of the monitor, were happy that their post had already received many views and Michael's reputation would soon come to an end. They were frightened by Billy's voice creeping up behind them, who asked what they were doing here. To which they replied that a certain Michael had been behaving very defiantly lately, and they decided to teach him a lesson. Looking at the photo on the internet, Billy immediately recognized the same guy who so brazenly got into the tournament and took the victory from him. But now, having looked at him more closely, he remembered the one he constantly beat and harassed in high school. And then he said that he had known this guy since school, and the definition of a womanizer definitely didn't suit him. He was rather a suck-up, brazenly pestering girls and clinging to everyone who showed him a sign of attention. And since there was intriguing material here, the young correspondents quickly made Billy sit comfortably and asked him to tell everything in detail, and more slowly, so that he could write everything down. Billy reveled in the thought of revenge, where not a trace should remain of the reputation of Michael, who so brazenly deprived him of the respect of his coach and first place in competitions. Soon the entire university was reading and was shocked by the news, where Michael was accused of molesting girls, of violence against them, and in general of almost half of the crimes provided for by criminal law. Shouting that this state of affairs was unacceptable, the rector of the university slammed his phone onto the table with all his might. He abruptly stood up from the table and loudly declared that this should not happen at his university, and he would personally conduct the most thorough investigation, where he would kick out that guy if everything was confirmed, and his personal assistant looked with tears at the broken phone that I personally searched for the boss for a whole week. Michael is a unique person, coming from a wealthy family, and cannot ignore the girl's misfortunes. He is a fair and selfless person who will never ignore someone else's misfortune and will always protect. Every girl in this city can rely on him and count on his help and support. Every night he turns into a superhero, punishes evil, and saves this city full of sin. This is exactly how Jessica described Michael, sitting in a chair in front of the investigation team. Those who could not believe what they heard said that the girl was clearly exaggerating and asked for clarification about the source of such conclusions. To which the girl displeasedly stated that these conclusions were based on unquestionable female intuition. The rector standing nearby asked the assistant whether the words of this girl could be trusted, to which the assistant, reading the personal file, replied that the girl was from a good family, was the chairman of the student society, and there was no reason not to trust her. But the incredulous rector gave instructions to ask the opinions of other students, including students in the same faculty as Michael. In connection with this decision, the investigation team members asked Veronica, who was walking on campus, to come with them. And now she, bursting into tears, was already sitting in the office and telling how she and Michael broke up because of her, and now he doesn't pay attention to her, but at the same time she called him the most reliable and worthy person. Where an employee of the investigation team, having handed over napkins, was very surprised that despite the fact that the young man rejected the girl, he still continues to be a good person for her. The rector watched the girl's words about Michael silently from behind the glass, and then without saying a word he turned around and left the room, leaving his assistant alone and with a feeling of misunderstanding of what was happening. Having lit another cigarette, the rector stood and thought that there was a high probability that Michael had been slandered, and in fact, he was a good guy. He was distracted from these thoughts by the approach of Angelica and her father, from whom he asked how he could help. To which they, unfolding a poster where it was written about Michael's innocence, said that this guy had helped their family a lot, and they came to support him, where Angelica also studies here, only at a different faculty. This state of affairs could not leave the rector indifferent, where absolutely everything spoke in Michael's favor. saying that he would certainly sort everything out immediately, and thanking Angelica and her father for their participation, the rector said goodbye to them. And then he decided to visit the internet himself, where he could read independent and objective comments from people uninterested in the outcome of the issue. Where literally from the first page, he came across a positive review about Michael and an expressed desire to get to know him better from some girl. What followed was an independent description of the young man's participation and victory in an athletics competition, where he beat the reigning champion. There was also talk about Michael's very friendly attitude towards all the girls, where under the pictures and views there were dozens of comments from girls that this decent young man was simply slandered, and each of them would be happy to be considered his girlfriend. This finally convinced the rector of Michael's innocence, where he saw that the guy was simply the idol of all the girls, which probably provoked his envious people to slander. Instantly, pictures of the past appeared in the man's head. After all, at one time he too was the best of the best, and a unique handsome man in the entire university, attracting the attention of all the girls, which of course regularly attracted a variety of envious people. There was no internet then, and in order to set him up, these envious people damaged university property in his name, for which he was brought to disciplinary liability. His parents paid a fine, and this whole story almost ended with his expulsion. With tears in his eyes, the rector spoke out loud words of understanding to Michael, who was not there. And finally, having collected his thoughts and wiped away his tears, the rector loudly declared that he, the head of this university, would never allow lies and slander to flourish here, and justice would be restored immediately. After just a couple of hours, all university students were gathered in the assembly hall, where Michael stood on stage in complete confusion and listened as the rector made a statement that the information recently circulated about this young man was blatant slander. The rector's impulses reached the point that he hugged the young man and said that today they had all gathered here in order to restore his good name. Then, with the words that Michael is the pride of the university and the most good-natured person, the rector presented him with a certificate of honor. And at that very moment, the whole hall burst into thunderous applause for Michael. And among this applauding crowd stood an embittered Billy, who could not understand what had happened, because he hoped that the false information he had reported, spread on the internet, would completely destroy Michael, who had just for some reason suddenly been awarded a certificate of honor. Not far from him stood Christy, who supported the ovation and noted to herself that Michael was very good. And then Michael saw messages that Christy's favor was beginning to grow with a plus sign, after which he looked at the beautiful girl, who was clearly beginning to experience some feelings towards him. The event was over, and all the students began to disperse in all directions. And the restless Billy approached Christy and began to make claims against her regarding the fact that she applauded Michael so zealously, causing such stupid claims to cause an attack of anger in the girl, saying that she has the right to admire good people, and Michael is a good person since he does a lot for people, but at the same time does not expect anything in return. The girl turned around and walked away from the evil gentleman. As she left, she also reminded the guy that when he beat him in the race, he could have reveled in his victory, but he behaved more than worthy, and even refused the offer to join the national team. Her affectionate tone in which she spoke about Michael completely drove Billy crazy. He grabbed the girl's wrist painfully, yelling at her to shut up and that Michael couldn't get around him. The pain brought tears to Christy's eyes, and she screamed for Billy to let her go. But the guy was definitely possessed by some kind of demon, where with a crazy look he began to say that Michael, in fact, is a nobody, while Billy's father has a huge fortune and offers to buy his son a luxury electric car. And then Michael passed by, who said that he didn't particularly like to show off his wealth at the university and asked not to send an overly expensive car for him. But the already familiar owner of the villa, who decided to come for such a valuable buyer himself, nevertheless drove a very noticeable car, the sight of which literally made Billy's eyes pop out of his head. Michael quickly climbed into the cabin and the car sped away. And Christy, looking at the car taking away the one she liked so much, told Billy that after his outburst it was better for them to end the relationship. But he didn't seem to even hear the girl, continuing to say that he didn't believe that he had just seen Michael drive away from here in a luxury car. And Michael and the seller of the villa had already arrived at the bank, where the young man transferred the remaining $50 million to the man, which evoked the most positive emotions from the former owner of the villa. He offered to give the young man a ride back to the university, which Michael refused, saying that the man's car was too conspicuous and he would rather get there on his own. While he was walking towards the university and thinking about what else could be more expensive to buy for Jessica, his attention was attracted by messages in the chat of the rich, where the seller of the house had already shared the news that the lone wolf had purchased a villa and expressed his most sincere gratitude for this help. To which Michael immediately replied that it was not at all difficult for him, and he was always happy to help. And suddenly it dawned on the young man that he could give the girl some very expensive car. After some time, Michael was already in one of the most expensive and popular car dealerships. He was met personally by the owner of the car dealership, who wholeheartedly greeted the lone wolf. This was the son of the head of a huge corporation known far beyond the borders of their city, which was mainly engaged in the production and sale of cars and cargo transportation by water on its own ships. Looking at the business card handed to him, Michael thought that for his age, this young man named Mark occupied a very good position in society. Without delaying time, Mark immediately invited Michael to walk through the salon and inspect the cars. And the salon employees accompanying Mark, watching the departing men, speculated who this visitor was, whom the director decided to accompany personally. As we drove, the director boasted that this car dealership was the best, and here Michael could find absolutely any car. Hearing this statement, the young man looked at Mark, after which, in his simple-minded manner, he said what kind of car he would like to buy. This had its effect, where the director began to say something about the limited edition of such cars and their exorbitant price. And after Michael named several more brands of expensive luxury cars, the director had no choice but to say that their showroom sold cars in the price range from $2 to $8 million. To which Michael stated that apparently he couldn't find anything useful here and needed to go somewhere else. Mark, thinking that after purchasing a house worth $60 million, Michael was unlikely to manage the purchase of an expensive car, he decided, as they say, to play trump cards. Approaching one copy, he said that he was ready to offer the young man the most expensive car they had in their showroom. After which he tore off the white sheet from the iron horse, revealing his beautiful form to the whimsical buyer. And then Mark was quick to name the cost of this automotive masterpiece, $22 million. Michael thought that in principle, $22 million is neither very expensive nor very cheap, which means it would be quite suitable as a gift for Jessica. He thanked the director for his efforts, said that he would pay by card, and asked to drive the car to the campus area. After which he handed the card to Mark, who was stunned by this turn of affairs. While the deal was being finalized, Michael received an incoming call from his best friend, Jack. Before he had time to press the green button on the mobile phone screen, a wild scream was heard from the phone speaker, informing Michael that she had cheated on him. Jack said that just yesterday his girlfriend Linda went to her friend's to get a manicure, but when it was late evening, she never returned. He went outside, intending to follow the route the girl was supposed to take, where I witnessed the farewell scene between Linda and some man. Forcefully placing the mug on the table, Jack, with tears in his eyes, finished his story by saying that he already had plans to introduce her to her parents. And then, without hesitation, Jack emptied the mug as Michael told him to stop drinking. And his friend suddenly turned to Michael with the question that maybe it was not too late to return Linda, to persuade her to be with him. But the young man's reaction to these words was quite aggressive, where he, grabbing his friend's clothes, said that it was the girl who was to blame for everything, not him. And Jack knelt down, saying that he seemed to understand everything, but he couldn't help himself. But Michael was unperturbed, coldly saying that Jack was delusional about the fact that his ex was, in fact, a good person. After which he took out his mobile phone and started dialing a number. And when a friend asked what he was up to, the young man replied that there was no need to worry, now he would arrange everything, and Linda would beg him to be together again. Michael called the manager of the car dealership where he had recently purchased a car, who at first responded without any enthusiasm. But when the young man said that he wanted to buy a few more luxury cars, Mark noticeably cheered up. And Jack silently watched as Michael carried out some manipulations with his phones, called somewhere, and negotiated something with someone. The last one was a conversation with a certain girl with whom Michael agreed to meet in the near future. And now, Less than an hour later, Angelica was already throwing herself into Michael's arms, saying that she missed her very much, which Jack was quite surprised by. At dinner, the young man introduced Jack and Angelica to each other. The girl asked out loud whether Michael had really made an appointment with her at such a late hour, just to introduce her to a friend, but she privately decided that meeting her best friend was a good indicator of the young man's intentions. Which is a clear indication that Michael likes her. And Michael, as always, simply replied that he invited her for a reason, but with the purpose of asking her to help them tomorrow in one matter. The long-awaited tomorrow for Jack came quickly enough for everyone else, including those who were racing along the track in an expensive sports car. And this was Linda with her new young man, with whom Jack found her, and who was now saying that the girl would not be happy with her ex. A bright red sports car appeared suddenly and seemingly out of nowhere. While completing the overtaking, he cut off the car in which the newly made couple was, forcing the driver to pull over to the side of the road. Linda's new boyfriend leaned out of the window, making an obscene gesture and hurling curses at the negligent driver of the red car. But when the car door opened, he was simply speechless. Where first a graceful female leg stood on the asphalt, after which a slender body appeared in a red dress, which very well highlighted and emphasized the girl's gorgeous breasts. And now Angelica was completely out of the car, where she amazed Linda's new boyfriend with her beauty, who completely forgot about everything in the world. But the show was just beginning, because the second door of the red car opened, and a man's foot stood on the asphalt. And now, adjusting the bracelet of his gold watch, Jack stood next to Angelica, the appearance of which caught Linda's attention. And then Angelica grabbed Jack's hand, saying that she was very scared that the guy driving could scratch her new car, which Jack had just given her, and Jack, trying to stop the trembling in his hands, replied that then he would buy her new. Linda's new boyfriend couldn't believe what he was seeing now, because everyone, including himself, thought that Jack's family was poor. Meanwhile, Linda began to be overcome by feelings of jealousy, envy, and anger. Finally, unable to bear it, Linda shouted at Jack what kind of performance he was putting on here, to which the latter did not pay attention, telling Angelica to get into the car. But Linda did not let up, saying that she was well aware of the financial situation of his family, and this performance was simply ridiculous. Meanwhile, Mark, who remained in the car, said that this woman had seen through them, to which Michael immediately replied that it did not matter, since the final stage of his plan was beginning, which would fix everything. Before he could finish speaking, a strong roar of engines was heard and elite sports cars began to appear around the bend, one after another, which stopped near the place where the performance was taking place, instantly filling the empty space with their chic shine. Immediately, many young people got out of the cars, greeted Jack in a friendly manner, and headed towards Linda's new boyfriend. The young man in white, who introduced himself as Julian, literally hung himself on Linda and her companion and asked what this rogue told her about himself, suggesting that these were tales about his family owning coal deposits. After which Julian immediately turned his attention to Linda's new boyfriend, saying that he was a common liar who only pretended to be rich in order to get girls into bed. And then, returning to the others, the guy laughed and loudly added that the methods of this loser are as old as time, and it is completely unclear how anyone else could fall for them. Everything she heard plunged the girl into severe shock, where only thoughts swirled in her head about how she could have made a mistake with her choice. In a fit of rage, she rushed after her lover, shouting curses in his wake and wishing him a speedy death. And Jack, looking sadly at what was happening, just as sadly invited Angelica to return to the car, to which she agreed. But then his movement that had begun was stopped by Linda, who literally grabbed the young man's leg, accompanying her actions with words that she had made a mistake and requests to forgive her and give her another chance. But Jack, having silently listened to everything the girl tried to justify her behavior with, just as silently, with a sharp movement, tore his leg out of her hands. And as he left for the car, without turning around, he said that from now on he was cutting off all ties with Linda and asked her not to call again, not to write to him, and not to appear in his life at all. And Linda's new ex-boyfriend, who tried to quietly disappear from the scene, did not notice how he bumped into someone. It was Michael, who said that he couldn't just leave here, since he would now give him 100 slaps in the face for his friend. The day that began with a grandiose performance continued with young people in one of the city clubs, where the center of attention was Michael, who thanked everyone for helping him teach the mercantile girl a lesson today. Before the young man had time to finish his words of gratitude, Julian suddenly turned to him, who said that he had already heard about how Michael supported the girls on the online platform, and now he needed a little help. Realizing that he could only spend money on girls, the young man tensed a little, asking what exactly Julian needed. To which Julian replied that there was one girl on the platform whom he would really like to support, but currently he does not have the free funds for this. Hearing this, Michael, on the one hand, relaxed, and on the other hand realized that this was a great opportunity to spend money on girls, and at the same time gain a foothold in the company of these rich boys. Here, Mark intervened in the conversation, saying that there is no need for a lone wolf to support anyone on the platform, and addressed not the most flattering words to Julian, and told Michael not to take the request seriously. Having listened to everything the young people said, Michael suddenly forcefully put his glass on the table. This attracted the attention of the entire company of young people, who became wary in anticipation of what might happen now. But Michael, having unlocked his phone, rolled it on the table towards Julian, saying that while he was going to the toilet, he could spend money on the right girl. The young man never expected such a turn of events, where he would be so easily trusted to manage other people's money at his own discretion. And satisfied, Michael went to the restroom, thinking that it would have been much worse if his company had asked him to pay the bill. In the restroom next to Michael stood a big guy, who was quite surprised when he saw the one standing next to him. Without further ado, the big man showed Michael an approving gesture, which greatly surprised the young man, who did not understand what kind of attention was coming from this guy in his direction. Upon returning to the hall, Michael saw a picture where everyone who was in their company had gathered around Julian and vying with each other, shouting and giving advice about how much more money needed to be transferred. He somehow managed to squeeze through the dense rows of spectators to look at what was happening. And Julian, who saw him, literally begged for salvation and asked the lone wolf to take the phone as soon as possible. Having fulfilled his requests and looked at the balance, the young man noted out loud with disappointment that he had been gone for quite a long time, but the guys were only able to spend $20 million. This did not go unnoticed by the company, which immediately once again wondered who this lone wolf was and what the condition of his family was. And Julian himself, wiping his sweaty forehead from exertion, said that he himself spent no more than a few tens of thousands of dollars at a time, but several million was too much. Michael suddenly said that probably 20 million is not serious, and the amount should be increased to 60, which completely shocked his new comrade. Julian hurried to approach Michael and, grabbing his hand with the phone, said that that girl on the platform was definitely not worth it, and there was no need to spend so much money on her. After everything, Mark approached Julian and said that there was no need to test the lone wolf. Such people simply need to be respected. After which Julian, raising his glass, asked Michael for forgiveness for his behavior and made himself available to the latter at any time of the day or night. And the conversations of the young people were watched from the side by the girls, who noted that the lone wolf must have a strong influence, since Julian himself, whose family is very famous in the city, gives him signs of respect. Suddenly, Michael was attracted by a message received on his cell phone. Having read it, he quickly said goodbye and, offering to continue another time, since he had urgent matters, left the club with a measured step. Looking after him as he left, someone dared to say that Michael simply did not want to pay the bill, to which he immediately heard in response that a man who calmly spends millions in a couple of hours is definitely capable of paying the bill. Moving down the street, the young man typed a message to Miranda, who wrote that she had returned to the city, agreeing to her offer to meet. Michael waited a long time for this mercantile girl to ask him to meet, and now it's time to receive favor points, reinforcement points, and cash bonuses from what you spend on her. The next day, Miranda, who had just stepped off the plane, was walking and mentally preparing herself that this was just a date, and she would be able to extract more money from the lone wolf. After all, she had absolutely everything a man could dream of. After the meeting, Michael and Miranda headed to the nearest cafe. There, they talked over coffee, where Michael was constantly distracted by his phone, where Veronica constantly wrote to him, asking for forgiveness. Because of this, he often simply did not hear what the girl told him, and repeatedly asked her to repeat what was said. Of course, Mirinda was very angry that the guy was not focusing his attention on such a beauty like her, and thought about getting up and leaving, but at the same moment she remembered her boss, who would definitely not be happy if the lone wolf was missed. And trying on the most good-natured expression on her face, she continued the conversation, repeating her words that Michael is very young, but at the same time very rich, which is probably a consequence of the fact that he occupies a high position. Suddenly, the system issued a message that Mirinda's favorability score for the master was plus 60 points, and therefore the system could not register her, which was not very good, since all the money spent risked being wasted. The plan in the young man's head matured quite quickly, where he simply needed to lower his favorability rating a little, which he immediately did, sticking his finger in his nose and saying that he did not hold any positions, but was an ordinary poor man without an education. The girl, who did not want to believe it, embarrassedly said that the kind of money the young man has does not fall from heaven, which means that he at least has his own business. To which Michael innocently replied that he didn't have any business, he was just spending his father's money. But now his father's company had gone bankrupt, and now they owed creditors several million. And then, taking the girl by the hands, Michael added that he in fact met her for this purpose to ask him to return part of the money that he sent her through the online platform. This state of affairs, of course, completely drove the girl crazy, where she screamed that Michael was not a real man and was only acting like a rich man, although in fact he was a beggar, and the system immediately notified the young man of a significant decrease in his favorability rating. Taking out her phone and searching for the desired contact in her address book, Mirinda said that she was just wasting her time with him here, and the system, meanwhile, continued to send messages about the rating downgrade. Finally, the girl dialed the right number and asked the man who answered, whom she called Jim, to pick her up from the cafe where some pervert was pestering her. And Michael, looking at the girl's actions, mentally concluded that he had met girls greedy for money before, but he still had to look for someone like Mirinda. And it didn't take long for Jim to arrive, who, upon entering the cafe, immediately began shouting to leave his girlfriend alone. The girl, seeing the savior and his joyful face, immediately rushed to meet him, wailing about how the pervert grabbed her hand behind her back. But instead of taking Mirinda into his arms, Jim suddenly walked past and moved on, where he approached Michael and, firmly shaking his hand, rejoiced at such an unexpected meeting and asked the young man, who did not understand what was happening, what he was doing here. Seeing that Michael did not recognize him, Jim reminded him that yesterday they were drinking together at the club with Julian. And then Michael remembered this guy, also expressing his joy at meeting him, and his new friend expressed regret that yesterday they were not able to have a proper walk, and therefore today he is giving a treat where he will not accept Michael's refusal. Mirinda looked at everything that was happening with her shocked gaze. She couldn't understand how a man like Jim, whose family was at the very top of the rich, could suddenly be so kind to the poor Michael. The girl tried to approach him and say a few words, but Jim rudely interrupted her speech, saying that the lone wolf was a very close friend of his good friend. And then he said that this guy has more money than all the rich families in the city could ever dream of. Glancing sharply at Michael, Mirinda suddenly realized that his words about poverty were nothing more than a test. Concluding that she needed to somehow rehabilitate herself, the girl came up and timidly asked Michael for forgiveness for her unworthy behavior. And Michael, listening at the same time to the system's message that Mirinda had been added, answered her that he forgives her, since the girl is simply still young and stupid, which could not but please Mirinda, who expressed words of gratitude, and the system began sending messages about adding favor points. Michael thought to himself that it was not in vain that the girl went to work in online broadcasting, because as long as the client has money, goodwill will flow out of her like a fountain, which personally only benefits him. Here, Jim intervened in the conversation, angrily declaring that the lone wolf had already spent many millions on her, and she invited him to such a worthless cafe. After which he stood up and approached Michael and said that they needed to go to one of the best restaurants in the city, where, as they had already been told, he would treat him, to which the lone wolf, of course, agreed. After watching for a while how the guys were seated in the car, Miranda decided not to miss the opportunity and announced that she was going with them. While they were heading towards the restaurant, the girl decided to make up for lost time and strengthen her connection with the rich young man, clinging tightly to him and taking his arm. In a gentle voice, she asked if the lone wolf was no longer angry with her, where Michael, without looking up from the phone, said that of course not, and Miranda managed to note that he was going to go online. Once on the site, the lone wolf chose his next victim in the form of a beautiful dark-haired girl. And Miranda had no choice but to silently observe Michael's actions, waiting for their continuation. And what followed next horrified Miranda. However, not only she was in shock, the girl participating in the online broadcast, seeing the size of the transfer, could no longer utter a word. She fainted right in front of the cameras, where the film crew had no choice but to call doctors. Well, Miranda was literally tearing her hair out, thinking that these $3 million, which the lone wolf had just transferred, could go to her. But suddenly, looking at the attractive young man, she began to feel something different. Where Michael appeared before her as a very, very sexy young man, where his peak occurs precisely at the moment when he spends money. The girls clearly imagined how his fingers moved not on the phone screen, but on her body, and the voiceover announced to Michael that the girl's level of affection for him immediately increased by 50 points. He glanced sideways at Miranda, thinking that there was clearly something wrong with her, since her disposition was growing from the fact that he was simply spending money and not on her. Soon they were already in a restaurant where only the highest circles of society could afford to dine, and Jim especially noted that this restaurant was distinguished by 3 main features. Michael quickly guessed the first 2, naming a non-trivial kitchen and a unique design. This earned him the praise of his newly made friend, who did not torment the guests with anticipation. And, pointing to one of the gazebos, he said that the 3rd distinctive feature was that girl playing a musical instrument, who is the daughter of the restaurant owner and has unique beauty. Hearing voices, Jessica looked up and saw Michael standing nearby. And the lone wolf himself never expected to meet his other girlfriend in the restaurant. And the first thing that caught Jessica's eye was how tenaciously some pretty girl grabbed Michael's hand. At the same time, it was announced that -5 points had been taken away from Jessica's favor, and the girl herself, in a fit of rage, even broke her musical instrument. She cast a sad look at Michael, after which, unable to withstand such tension from the surging feelings, she rushed away with tears in her eyes. There was very little time left before receiving the so-called cashback and reinforcement points, and Michael decided that it would be stupid to lose it all now, and therefore rushed after the girl. Possessing extraordinary abilities, he instantly caught up with Jessica, blocking her further path. And the girl immediately began to accuse him of playing with her feelings, where tears flowed from her eyes without stopping. The young man quickly tried to figure out what to do in this situation so as not to lose all his favor points. Deciding to risk everything, he asked if the girl knew about the very first rich man in their city. But the offended girl said that now they are talking about his betrayal and not about who has how much money. But the young man, having lit a cigarette, said that he was the same famous rich man about whom there were so many rumors, which was how he was able to slightly attract the girl's attention to his words. Exhaling smoke, Michael asked if she had wondered why he lived such a simple life in such a condition. And without waiting for an answer, he said that in their family, for more than 1 century, there has been a tradition where a young member of the family, upon reaching the age of 18, must spend $10 billion in a month in order to then inherit the entire fortune of $100 billion. It is for this reason that he diligently spends money, somewhere he invests in some incomprehensible projects that do not promise profit, spends huge amounts of money on charity. And concluding his fictitious story, Michael said that the girl who came with him was engaged in online broadcasts, and he, fulfilling his responsibility to spend, sent her a huge amount of money, which of course attracted her attention to him. Without even allowing the girl to come to her senses, the young man took her hand and said that no one knows his secret, and he does not expect understanding from her. He was just tired of living in secret and wanted to share it with at least someone. Without adding anything else, Michael turned sharply and walked away from the girl, shocked by such details of the life of a lone wolf. The mind of Jessica, who had come to her senses a little, began to formulate conclusions that she had no reason to doubt this young man because he was only trying to get an inheritance and was not cheating on her. For a few more seconds, she looked at the back of Michael as he walked away. But telling him not to leave, that she was wrong, Jessica rushed after him and pressed herself with all her might against his system-pumped body. Michael, continuing to play his role without a word, simply gently placed his palm on top of the girl's palms, pressing them to him. Jessica, clinging tightly to the young man's back, continued to think that Michael was so strongly attracted to her that he even dared to reveal a family secret. And in conclusion, she was imbued with the idea that this young man really loved her, and Michael was told that plus 20 points had been added to his favorability rating. Very soon they returned to the others, where Jessica apologized for the way she behaved, which caused a storm of emotions on the part of Jim, who marveled at how cool the lone wolf was, who managed to change this girl's mood so much in just 5 minutes. But for Miranda, the appearance of a rival was completely unpleasant, where she decided that she would do everything so that the rich man would go to her. During the meal, Miranda asked the lone wolf to introduce them to the girl he returned with. This flattered Jessica, who sarcastically stated that Michael, apparently, did not even tell her his name, since she calls him a lone wolf, which shows his disinterest in Miranda. Such directness on the part of the restaurant owner's daughter greatly surprised Jim, where he imagined Jessica in the role of some huge bird of prey, ready to instantly deal with its prey. Of course, such statements could not help but offend Miranda, and she was about to begin to develop the emerging conflict. But then, in his usual simple-minded manner, Michael intervened, who said that enough talking and it was time to continue the meal, after which the two embittered girls could only give corresponding glances to each other. Jim was very surprised at how much attention the lone wolf received from the girls and sincerely admired him, where in his eyes Michael appeared simply as some kind of all-powerful demon tempter. Looking at the modest manner in which the young man ate, Jim came to the conclusion that previously he was fascinated only by the material side of this guy, but now for him he is becoming something like a spiritual mentor, from whom he needs to take an example in everything. After dinner, which, to Michael's delight, he didn't have to pay for, he moved down the street, studying how many points remained to be collected for each girl registered in the system. Suddenly, he saw a notification that another target had been added to the system. Opening the girl's profile, Michael saw the face of Christy, a girl with whom he had not yet had a chance to really talk. He walked, thinking that the level of her disposition towards him was very, very high, which showed his strong attractiveness in the girl's eyes. And then a conversation between two guys reached his ears about how one of the students was now declaring his love, and he needed to have time to look at this spectacle. Michael also wondered what kind of knight on a white horse decided to confess his feelings so openly. It was Billy, who was kneeling with his hands outstretched, clutching a large, beautiful bouquet. On the contrary, Christy stood in complete bewilderment and listened to Billy's words of apology and requests to give him another chance. Then Michael squeezed through the crowd, who immediately noted that the performance that Billy put on was nothing more than a cheap performance. Before the young man had time to appear, he was immediately noticed by Christy, who immediately became noticeably cheerful. Paying no more attention to her ex, the girl rushed towards Michael, where Billy had no choice but to shed tears and scream for the girl to come back. Approaching the young man, Christy first asked if she remembered correctly that his name was Michael, and also expressed her most joyful feelings about the fact that they had met again. Without further ado, she said that she had sent a request to Michael to add her as a friend on a social network, and asked him not to ignore or reject it. And for Billy, it was a complete collapse of all his hopes, where he dropped his hands on the asphalt and bowed his head powerlessly. Gradually, he began to be overcome by rage, where he decided that he could not come to terms with this state of affairs, and would take revenge on both Michael and Christina. And Michael, as if hearing Billy's bad thoughts, suddenly turned his attention to him. Coming closer, he supposedly told Billy that he now thought badly of both him and Christy, did not understand how this happened, and could not come to terms with what had happened. To which Billy reacted very sharply, shouting that Michael had also decided to mock him. But suddenly Michael said that in fact he had always been jealous of Billy, where Billy is well built, active in sports, and has earned female attention. But he immediately got lost as soon as he stopped being in the spotlight after Michael's victory in the tournament. And all because for Billy, only victory was important, where he trained hard for many hours a day, completely forgetting that he needed to devote time and attention to his girlfriend. Concluding his speech, Michael said that Billy himself pushed Christy away from himself, and if anyone needed to be hated, it was only himself. There was a rational grain in the words of his competitor, and now Billy fully realized this. And the crowd immediately picked up Michael's words, and exclamations began to be heard from everywhere, where people came to the conclusion that it was indeed Billy himself who was to blame for the fact that his relationship had collapsed. But Michael's speech had the strongest effect, of course, on Christy, who was now only thinking about how well this guy understood her. And this guy, meanwhile, was listening to the message that the girl's level of disposition had already exceeded 90. Among this entire crowd, Jessica's neighbor Kate turned out to be an involuntary spectator of what was happening. Believing that Michael and Christy had some kind of connection with each other, the girl decisively moved into the dormitory, intending to immediately tell her neighbor everything. Jessica, who was making a face mask, almost jumped out of her heart when Kate burst into the room. She immediately began to tell her friend that she had just witnessed how some girl confessed her love to Michael. To which Jessica replied that Michael cannot and should not control the feelings of other people, and the fact that other girls are grateful to him for his help is quite normal. But Kate did not let up. Taking out her mobile phone, she showed her friend how much money the lone wolf spends on other girls and asked how she could explain it. To which Jessica said that she is aware of these expenses of his, since Michael mentioned them, and these are not all of his major expenses. Then she added that her relationship with Michael was built on trust, which completely discouraged her poor neighbor. Humming some song under her breath, Jessica left her friend with the thoughts that Jessica's falling in love and her conclusions were not smart. Michael yawned impolitely loudly, to which his companion told him to concentrate, but immediately heard in response from the young man that he had no intention of coming here at all. The girl sitting opposite recognized Michael and made eyes at him, asking if he was free that evening. And while his companion was trying to somehow justify the behavior of these girls, whom in fact he had invited, Michael suddenly asked a question about what she was doing here, pointing somewhere. There, Veronica moved around the hall, bursting into tears. Michael's companion said that she found out that he would be here, so she came too, and then added that she was visiting a doctor after talking with Michael. After listening to his comrade, the young lone wolf decided that, apparently, he had gone too far with Veronica's revenge. He remembered the day when she caused him a very terrible mental wound. However, Michael was now coming to the conclusion that Veronica had truly redeemed herself and was repenting. He decided that she did not deserve to die for the insult that she caused him, and he did not turn out to torture the poor girl. Then the girls who were sitting nearby said that there was a rumor going around the university that he was that famous rich lone wolf, which made Veronica turn all attention while Michael tried to respond to this. But suddenly a man's voice was heard from the side, saying that if Michael was really that lone wolf, then he would tear off his own head and play football with her. Moving towards Michael, a certain man said that whoever appears online under the name of a lone wolf spends millions, and Michael cares about every penny. Michael stood and silently looked at the approaching man, where he, without even taking the cigar out of his mouth, came almost close to Veronica, introducing himself as Richard, the owner of this store, and asked the girl for her phone number, saying that he had noticed her a long time ago. He was able to catch the attention of Veronica, who lately had been doing nothing but regretting her failed relationship with Michael, and she responded to his attention with a friendly look, while blushing a little.